data points that have been written before we ever came out of our mother's wombs. We all come from different starting points, different faith traditions, different orientation, different ways of being, but no one starts from scratch.
All right.
We all come from something, and that, my dear brothers and sisters, I want to submit to you tonight, is legacy. Legacy in and of itself is actually quite neutral. Neither something to be admired or something to be ashamed of, but simply an offering of what has come before us. Yeah. And each of us in this room is a product of legacy.
Legacy is a rich inheritance that we have. It is an heirloom that we have that gives us the capacity to move forward with the resources and with the gifts, with the perspective and with the possibilities that are illuminated by our past. Somebody say legacy. Legacy. Legacy is what lets us know that we are not a liability. Legacy is what lets us know that we don't have to be limited by our particular point within history. We don't have to be limited by stereotypes, but instead we have not only a noble cultural inheritance, but we have a glorious and global inheritance. When we think about what it means to be here for 400 years upon these shores, for 1619 until 2019, because we do recognize that it's been 400 years since we've been doing this pilgrimage in the Americas, yes? Yes. We have a legacy of spiritual creativity. We have a legacy of creating democracy out of the absence of civilly recognized rights, out of the absence of recognized human rights. We have a legacy of being creative about the forward advance of equality, about the forward advance of freedom, about the forward advance of justice, about the forward advance of hope. When it seemed that all we had is hopefulness, we have a legacy. Legacy is a creative reception of and improvisation within a tradition. Legacy is Florida's own Dream Defenders, improvising within the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee tradition of democratic action. Legacy, y'all, it's churches and synagogues and mosques working together to push faith communities not towards separating children at the border, not towards antagonism towards same-gender loving folks, but legacy is faith communities insisting on doing justice, loving mercy, and somebody say walking humbly with God. Legacy is the recognition that we drink from wells that we have not dug, eat from trees we have not planted, and that we therefore have an obligation and opportunity to till the gardens where God has planted us. In other words, we are not chefs without ingredients. You may not have the rosemary you want, you may not have the sage that you want, but we all have something in the cupboard. We all have something in the pantry. We all have something that we can use to create the kind of gumbo that we need to make the democracy that we also desperately desire. We have a legacy.
And so as we gather here tonight, we want to remind you to take time to cherish your legacy. As a matter of fact, we want to applaud you because you're here tonight, so you're already cherishing your legacy. But we want to encourage you, cherish the legacy of your own family. Cherish the legacy of our people collectively. And we are Christian ministers, and so in our tradition, we rely upon the Holy Scriptures as a manuscript for living. And so in the passage we read today, we find a letter that is written from one of Christianity's most storied figures, Paul. And Paul is writing to his protege, Timothy. It's important to note here that Paul and Timothy are not related by blood, but they have a kinship that is shared between a mentor and a mentee. And what we find is powerful here is that Paul is writing to Timothy, which signifies the next generation, but he's writing to Timothy and referencing Timothy's bloodline. He's referencing Timothy's personal family. Paul names the faith of Timothy's mother. Paul names the faith of Timothy's grandmother. And as a woman, I love that he names women and the faith, the story, tradition of the women. And there be women out there who have prayed for your children and prayed for your grandchildren, and your children are making it off of your prayers. And so Paul names the bloodline, even though he and Timothy are not blood related. And Paul asserts that the same faith that Timothy's ancestors had is the faith that he would have. And what I love about this is that it shows the power of legacy. It shows how the work that one generation does can be strong enough to give the next generation a healthy starting point. It can give the next generation a running start. Sometimes not even with physical things, but rather with personal tenacity. How many of us had grandmothers who couldn't leave you with wealth, but they taught you how to protect what you had. They taught you how to preserve what you had. They taught you how to make $1 out of 15 cents. They taught you how to pour some water into some flour and feed 10 people off of something that the box said would feed 2. I don't have any witnesses in the building. Legacy is not just leaving wealth, but legacy is leaving tricks of the trade, best practices, letting your loved ones know how to get over, how to get by, how to make it over. How many of us had some fathers who couldn't write a blank check and tell us that everything was okay, but they could tell us how to budget what we had. They could tell us how to pick up a trade and a skill set and get yourself a job and prepare for yourself. That is legacy. Legacy is what we do now to ensure that those coming behind us have it a little bit easier than what we did. And that is why we submit to you tonight that legacy matters.